Warning, this podcast contains descriptions of murder, torture and abuse. As a result, it may not be suitable for everybody. Mobile, Alabama, USA. One of the Gulf Coast's cultural cities, Mobile boasts more Hall of Fame baseball players than any other city except New York City and Los Angeles, and Mobile has one of the oldest Mardi Gras celebrations in the USA. Listen to the hometown murders of John Lewis Evans, the first inmate executed in the state of Alabama after they rescinded the ban on executions, Joseph Paul Franklin, an American white supremacist and killer, and the lynching of Michael Donald by the KKK. The first hometown murders case we're looking at today is John Lewis Evans III. He was born January 4th, 1950 and died April 22nd, 1983. He was the first inmate to be executed by the state of Alabama after the United States reinstated the death penalty in 1976. As a result, the manner of his execution is frequently cited by opponents of capital punishment in the United States. Evans was born in Beaumont, Texas, and died in Altamont, Alabama at the age of 33. After Evans' parole in 1976 from an Indiana prison, himself and a fellow convict, Wayne Ritter, born January 30th, 1954 to August 28th, 1987, embarked on a 2-month-long crime spree involving, by Evans' own admission, 30 armed robberies, 9 kidnappings and 2 executions, schemes across several states. On January 5th, 1977, Evans and Ritter robbed and killed Edward Nassar, a pawn shop owner in Mobile, Alabama, while his 2 young daughters were in the store. Both fled but were captured on March 7th by FBI agents in Little Rock, Arkansas. Among the evidence recovered was a gun used to shoot Nassar in the back and another gun stolen from the pawn shop. Although Evans gave a detailed confession, prosecutors refused to accept his plea of guilty because they wanted Evans sentenced to death, and under Alabama law, this was only allowed following a conviction by a jury. Evans was tried in State Circuit Court in Mobile, Alabama on April 26, 1977 for first-degree murder committed during commission of a robbery. During the trial, Evans again admitted to his crime and stated he did not feel remorse and that under the same circumstances he would kill again. Furthermore, he threatened that if the jury did not sentence him to death, he would escape and murder each of them. Despite his testimony, the jury was instructed to consider all evidence and to return a verdict of guilty only if prosecutors had left no reasonable doubt. The jury convicted Evans of capital offences charged, thus imposing the death penalty after less than 15 minutes of deliberation. Under Alabama law, all capital sentences must be affirmed by review in High Court. The sentence of death was confirmed by Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and by the Alabama Supreme Court, which set the date of August 6, 1979 for his execution. On April 2nd, Evans' mother, Betty, acting as next friend, petitioned the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Alabama for a writ of habeas corpus. The application requested the court to find Evans' conviction to be unconstitutional because consideration of lesser included offences were not offered to the jury. The district court dismissed her applications on the grounds that she was not entitled to act as a next friend. She appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which overturned the District Court's decision and in fact judged the initial criminal conviction to be invalid. In 1982, the Supreme Court of the United States granted the state's petition for a writ of certiorari, reversing the judgment of the Court of Appeals and returning them to the decision on the constitutionality of Evans' sentence. This finding was made with two of the justices, William J. Brennan and Thurgood Marshall, entering opinion, quote, concurring in part and dissenting in part, end quote, because they accepted the argument of the state of Alabama on the matter in question, but held that the capital punishment itself was, quote, cruel and unusual punishment, end quote, prohibited by the 8th and 14th Amendments of the Constitution of the United States. In July of that year, Evans fired his lawyers and filed a motion to dismiss all further appeals. The Court of Appeals accepted his motion on October 19, 1982. A subsequent application for a new sentencing hearing was rejected by Alabama Supreme Court on February 18, 1983, and was execution carried out at the Holman Prison near Altmore, Alabama on April 22nd. The execution is notable for its imposition. The means of carrying out the sentence of death used at Holman Prison was an electric chair constructed by an inmate in 1927. The chair was nicknamed Yellow Mama because of its traffic yellow coat of paint. It had not been used since 1965, after which a series of Supreme Court decisions created an effective moratorium on executions in the United States until the constitutionality of the death penalty was affirmed by the court in Gregg v. Georgia, 1976. The execution was witnessed by reporter Mark Harris, who wrote his first-person account in the United Press International, published on the 4th of May 1983. Quote, "We thought that it was bad enough, but expected and bearable. 2 doctors filled out the witness room to examine the body and pronounce Evans dead. The prison doctor, dressed in a blue surgical costume and tan loafers with tassels, placed a stethoscope to the smock, turned and nodded, the natural sign for yes, he's dead. But the nod meant he had found a heartbeat. The other doctor confirmed the gruesome discovery." End quote. The following description of Evans' execution was sworn by Evans' attorney, Russell F. Cannon, on June 22, 1983. Quote, "At 8:20 p.m, the first jolt of 1900 volts of electricity passed through Mr. Evans' body. It lasted 30 seconds. Sparks and flames erupted from the electrode tied to Mr. Evans' left leg. His body slammed against the straps holding him in an electric chair, and his fists clenched permanently. The electrode apparently burst from the strap holding it in place. A large puff of greyish smoke and sparks poured out from under the hood that covered Mr. Evans' face. An overpowering stench of burnt flesh and clothing began pervading the witness room. 2 doctors examined Mr. Evans and declared that he was not dead. The electrode on the left leg was refastened. At 8:30 p.m, Mr. Evans was administered a second 30-second jolt of electricity. The stench of burning flesh was nauseating. More smoke emanated from his leg and head. Again, the doctors examined Mr. Evans. The doctors reported his heart was still beating and that he was still alive. At that time, I asked the prison commissioner, who was communicating on an open telephone to Governor George Wallace, to grant clemency on the grounds that Mr. Evans was being subject to cruel and unusual punishment. The request for clemency was denied. At 8:40 p.m, a third charge of electricity, 30 seconds in duration, was passed through Mr. Evans' body. At 8:44, the doctors pronounced him dead. The electrocution of John Evans took 14 minutes. Shortly before his execution, Evans was featured in an after-school special called Dead Wrong, which he shared his life story with young people and pleaded with them not to make the mistakes that he did that led to the electric chair. The program makes no reference to the multiple shocks required to end Evans' life. Evans' accomplice, Wayne Ritter was electrocuted on August 28, 1987. The second hometown murders case we're looking at is Joseph Paul Franklin, an American white supremacist and serial killer who engaged in murder spanning the late 1970s and early 1980s. He was born April 13, 1950 and died November 20, 2013. Franklin was convicted of several murders and received 6 life sentences as well as 2 death sentences. He also confessed to the attempted murders of magazine publisher and pornographer Larry Flynt in 1978 and civil rights activist Vernon Jordan in the 1980s. Both survived their injuries, but Flynt was left permanently paralysed from the waist down. Franklin was not convicted in either of these highly publicised cases, and he made his confessions years after the crimes had occurred. Because he repeatedly changed his accounts of some crimes and was not charged in some of these cases in which he was expected, officials cannot determine the full extent of Franklin's crimes. His claims of racial motivation were offset by a defense expert witness who testified in 1997 that Franklin had paranoid schizophrenia and was not fit to stand trial. Franklin was on Missouri's death row for 15 years, awaiting execution for the 1977 murder of Gerald Gordon. He was executed by lethal injection on November 20th, 2013. For most of his life, Franklin was a drifter, roaming the East Coast seeking chances to cleanse the world of people he considered inferior, especially blacks and Jews. His primary source of financial support appears to have been bank robberies. Franklin supplemented his income from criminal acts with paid blood bank donations, which eventually led to his subsequent capture by the FBI. July 29, 1977, Franklin firebombed Beth Shalom Synagogue in Chattanooga, Tennessee, destroying it. Loss of life was prevented because some of the worshippers left early that evening, and as a result there was not enough worshippers for a minyan. August 17th, 1977. August the 7th, 1977, Franklin shot and killed a young interracial couple, Alphonse Manning Jr. and Tony Shewan, in a parking lot at East Town Hall in Madison, Wisconsin. October 8, 1977, in suburban St. Louis, Missouri, Franklin hid in bushes near Beth Shalom Kenneth Israel Synagogue and fired on a group attending services. In this incident, Franklin killed 42-year-old Gerald Gordon. He also wounded Stephen Goldman and William Ash. On March 6, 1978, Franklin, according to his later account, used a Ruger .44 caliber semi-automatic rifle to ambush hustler publisher Larry Flynt and his lawyer Gene Reeves in Lawrenceville, Georgia. In his confession, Franklin said that it was in retaliation for an edition of Hustler displaying interracial sex. Neither Franklin nor anyone else were ever charged in that shooting. On July 29, 1978, Franklin hid near a Pizza Hut in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and shot and killed Bryant Tatum, a black man with a 12-gauge shotgun. He also shot Tatum's white girlfriend Nancy Hilton, who survived. Franklin confessed and pleaded guilty, being given a life sentence as well as a sentence for unrelated armed robbery in 1977. On July 12, 1979, Taco Bell manager Harold McIver, a black man, was fatally shot through a window from 150 yards in Doraville, Georgia. Franklin confessed but was not tried or sentenced for this crime. Franklin said McIver was close in contact with white women, so he murdered him. On May 29, 1980, Franklin shot and seriously wounded civil rights activist and Urban League president Vernon Jordan after seeing him with a white woman in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Franklin initially denied any part in the crime and was acquitted, but later confessed. On June 8, 1980, Franklin confessed to killing cousins Darrell Lane, who was 14, and Dante Evans Brown, 13, in Cincinnati, Idaho. Waiting on an overpass to shoot a racially mixed couple, he shot the boys instead. He was convicted in 1998 and received 2 life sentences for these murders. On June 15, 1980, Franklin shot and killed Arthur Smothers, 22, Kathleen Mickler, 16, with a high-powered rifle as the couple walked across Washington Street Bridge in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Smothers was black, Mickler was white. On the day of the murder, Franklin took a concealed position on a wooded hillside overlooking downtown Johnstown and waited for potential targets to enter his line of sight. He was never arrested for these murders, but he confessed to them during a jailhouse interview after he was apprehended. June 25, 1980, Franklin used a .44 Ruger pistol to kill 2 hitchhikers, Nancy Sanatomura and Vicky Durain, 19 and 26 respectively, in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. He confessed to the crime in 1997 to a Ohio assistant prosecutor in the course of the investigation in another case. He said he picked up the white woman and decided to kill them after one said she had a black boyfriend. Jacob Beard of Florida was convicted and imprisoned in 1993 on these charges. He was freed in 1999 and a new trial was ordered based on Franklin's confession. August 20th, 1980, Franklin killed 2 black men, Ted Fields and David Martin, near Liberty Park, located in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was tried on federal civil rights charges as well as state first-degree murder charges. Following the 2 murders in Utah, Franklin returned to the Midwestern USA. Traveling through Kentucky, he was detained and questioned regarding a firearm that he was transporting in his car. Franklin's fled from his interrogation, but authorities recovered sufficient evidence from the vehicle to point suspicions that potentially linked him to the sniper killings. His racist tattoos, coupled with his habit of visiting blood banks, led investigators to issue a nationwide alert to blood banks. In October 1980, the tattoos drew the attention of a Florida blood bank worker who contacted the FBI. Franklin was arrested in Lakeland on October 28, 1980. He tried to escape during the judgment of the 1997 Missouri trial on charges of murdering Gerald Gordon. He was convicted of the murder charge. The psychiatrist Dorothy Opno-Lewis, who had interviewed him at length, testified for the defense that she believed that he was a paranoid schizophrenic and unfit to stand trial. Lewis noted his delusional thinking and a childhood history of severe abuse. In October 2013, Flint called for clemency for Franklin, asserting, quote, that a government that forbids killing among its citizens should not be in business of killing people itself, end quote. Franklin was held on death row at the Potsy Correctional Center near Mineral Point, Missouri. In August 2013, the Missouri Supreme Court announced that Franklin would be executed on November 20th. The Attorney General, Chris Costa, said in a statement that by setting execution dates, the state high court had, quote, has taken an important step to see that justice is finally done for the victims and their families, end quote. Franklin's execution was affected by a European Union export ban when the German drug manufacturer Fresenius Kabi was obliged to refuse having their drugs used for lethal injections. In response, Missouri announced that it would use for Franklin's execution a new method of lethal injection which used a single drug provided by an unnamed compounding pharmacy. A day before his execution, U.S. District Judge Nanette Leary, Jefferson City, granted a stay of execution over concerns raised about the new method of execution. A second stay was granted that evening by U.S. District Judge Carol E. Jackson, St. Louis, based on Franklin's claim that he was too mentally incompetent to be executed. An appeals court quickly overturned both stays, and the Supreme Court subsequently rejected his final appeals. In an interview with St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper published on November 17, 2013, Franklin said he had renounced his racist views. He said his motivation had been illogical and was partly a subsequence of an abusive upbringing. He said he had interacted with black people in prison, added, I quote, "I saw they were people just like us," end quote. Franklin was executed at Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bone Terre, Missouri on November 20th, 2013. The execution began at 6:07 a.m. CST and was pronounced dead at 6:17 a.m. His execution was the first lethal injection in Missouri to use pentobarbital alone instead of conventional 3-drug cocktail. An Associated Press report said that 5 grams of the barbiturate pentobarbital was administered. Franklin was pronounced dead 10 minutes later. 3 media witnesses said Franklin did not seem to show pain. He did not make any final written statement and did not speak a word in the death chamber. After the injection, he blinked a few times, breathed heavily a few times, swallowed hard, and the witnesses said the heaving of his chest slowed and he finally died. And the last hometown murders case we're looking at is the lynching of Michael Donald. It happened in Mobile, Alabama on March 21st, 1981 and was last reported lynching in the United States. Several Ku Klux Klan, the KKK members, beat and killed Michael Donald, a 19-year-old African American, and hung his body from a tree. One responsible, Henry Hayes, was executed by electric chair in 1997, while another, James Knowles, was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty and testifying against Hayes. A third man was convicted as an accomplice, and a fourth was indicted but died before his trial could be completed. Hayes' execution was the first in Alabama since 1913 for a white-on-black crime. It was the only execution of a KKK member during the 20th century for the murder of an African American. Donald's mother brought a civil suit for wrongful death against the United Klans of America, to which the attackers belonged. In 1987, a jury awarded her damages of $7 million, which bankrupted the organisation. This set a precedent for civil legal action for damage against other racist hate groups. Michael Donald, born July 24, 1961, was born and raised in Mobile, Alabama. He was the son of Bella May Gregory Donald and David Donald and was the youngest of 6 children. He attended local schools while growing up. In 1981, he was studying at a technical college while working at the local newspaper, the Mobile Press Register. Donald grew up in a city and state influenced by passage in the 1960s of federal civil rights legislation that ended legal segregation and provided for federal oversight and enforcement of voting rights. African Americans could again participate in politics in the South. Their ability to register to vote also meant that they were selected for juries. In 1981, Josephus Anderson, an African American charged with the murder of a white policeman in Birmingham, Alabama during an armed robbery, was tried in Mobile, where the case had been moved in a change of venue. The trial ended with a deadlock of the mixed white-black jury. At a meeting held in Mobile while the jury was still debating, members of the Unit 900 of the United Klans of America and Alabama realm complained that Anderson was not being convicted because the jury had African American members. Benny Jack Hayes, the second highest ranking official in the UKA, reportedly said, "If a black man can get away with killing a white man, we ought to be able to get away with killing a black man." On February 20th, 1981, a mistrial was declared on all 4 counts. The prosecution announced his intention to retry Anderson's case. At 10 p.m, local media started to report the jury's second failure to reach a verdict. Following a meeting held together the same day, Henry Hayes, aged 26, Bernie Hayes' son, an exalted Cyclops of the UKA, and James Llewellyn Tiger Knowles, aged 17, drove around Mobile, Alabama, looking for a black person to attack. Armed with a gun and equipped with a rope borrowed from Frank Cox, Hayes' brother-in-law. As Hales and Knowles were cruising through one of Mobile's mostly black neighbourhoods, they spotted Michael Donald walking home after he bought a pack of cigarettes at the nearby gas station for his sister. Without any link to the Anderson case or even a past criminal record, Donald was chosen at random for being black. The two UKA members lured him over to their car by asking him for directions to a local club and forced Donald into the car at gunpoint. The men then drove out to another county and took him to a secluded area in the woods near Mobile Bay. Donald attempted to escape, knocking away Hayes' gun and trying to run into the woods. The men pursued Donald, attacked him and beat him with a tree limb. Hayes wrapped a rope around Donald's neck and pulled it to strangle him, while Knowles continued to beat Donald with a tree branch. Once Donald had stopped moving, Hayes slit his throat 3 times to make sure he was dead. The two men left Donald's lifeless body hanging from a tree on Herndon Avenue across the street from Hayes' house in Mobile, where it remained until the morning. That same night, 2 other UKA members burned a cross on Mulberry County Courthouse lawn to celebrate the murder. While the local police chief suspected the Klan officers took first 3 suspects into custody based on their possible involvement in a drug deal gone wrong. Donald's mother insisted that her son had not been involved in drugs. The police released the suspects at the conclusion of their investigation. Bella Mae Donald contacted national civil rights activist Reverend Jesse Jackson, who organised a protest march in the city and demanded answers from the police. The FBI investigated the case and it was ready to close its investigation, but Thomas Figures, the assistant US attorney in Mobile, asked the Department of Justice to authorise a second investigation. He worked closely with FBI agent James Bodman. His brother, Michael Figures, a state senator and civil rights activist, served as an attorney to Bella Mae Donald and also encouraged the investigation. 2.5 years later, in 1983, Henry Hayes and James Knowles was arrested. Knowles confessed to Bodman in 1983, and additional evidence was revealed during the civil trial initiated by Donald's mother in 1984, leading to the indictment of Benjamin Franklin Cox Jr., a truck driver, as an accomplice in the criminal case. Henry's father, Beanie Hayes, was also indicted. Josephus Anderson, whose case was the background of Donald's killing, was eventually convicted of murder in 1985. Henry Francis Hayes was convicted of capital murder. The jury voted in favour of life imprisonment, but the judge overruled the jury's verdict and sentenced Hayes to death. He was incarcerated in Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama while on death row. Hayes was executed in Yellow Mama, Alabama's electric chair, on June 6, 1997. Among the witnesses to the execution was Michael Donald's brother. The Associated Press reported that Hayes was Alabama's first execution since 1913 for a white-on-black crime. Hayes is the only known KKK member to have been executed in the 21st century for the murder of an African American. James Llewellyn Tiger Knowles was indicted by a federal grand jury in 1985 for violating the civil rights of Michael Donald and pleaded guilty to civil rights violations in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Alabama. By the end of the trial, he was 21 years old. U.S. District Court Judge W. Brevand Hand sentenced him to life in prison. Knowles avoided the death penalty by testifying against Hayes, Cox and other Klansmen at the trial. He had earlier testified that the slaying was done, quote, to show Klan strength in Alabama, end quote. Knowles was released on parole in 2010. Benjamin Franklin Cox Jr, a truck driver for Mobile, was provided the rope, was initially discharged by a trial judge in 1984, citing Alabama's 3-year statute of limitations on criminal conspiracy, but an Alabama grand jury re-indicted Cox for the murder in 1987. Initially resulting in a mistrial in 1988, a second trial held on May 18, 1989, resulting in Cox's conviction for being an accomplice in Donald's killing. Mobile County Circuit Court Judge Michael Zuby sentenced the 28-year-old Cox to life in prison. The elder Hayes was indicted for inciting the murder. Tried some years later, his case ended in a mistrial when he collapsed in court. Judge Zuby said that because of the illness of the elder Hayes, then 71, he had no choice but to declare a mistrial. Hayes' lawyer was willing to go forward with proceedings. Hayes died of a heart attack before he could be retrialed. Acting on the request of Donald's mother, founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, brought a wrongful death suit in 1984 against the United Klans of America in federal court in the Southern District of Alabama, according to the SPLC. The civil trial brought out evidence that enabled the criminal indictment and conviction of Cox as an accomplice and of Benny Jack Hayes for inciting the murder. The original complaint was considered too vague to hold up, but Judge Alex T. Howard Jr. helped refine the legal theory of agency, which held the Klan accountable for acts of its members. This prevented the case from being dismissed before it could go to jury. In 1987, the Klan was found civilly liable by an all-white jury and sentenced to damages of $7 million in the wrongful death verdict in the case. The suit became a precedent for civil law action against other racist hate groups in the United States. Payment of the judgment bankrupted the United Klans of America and resulted in its national headquarters being sold for $51,000. The proceedings going to Donald's mother. She died the following year on September 17, 1988. Thank you for everybody who's listened to this episode. This episode has been researched, written and hosted by me, Andrew Knight. Sound, music and editing has been provided by Harry Edmondson. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere where you listen to your podcast. This allows the episode to be downloaded automatically as soon as it's released. Please reach out to us on the social media. We're at Hometown Murders on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Please support the show by leaving a 5-star rating or a review. It really does help